CCTV and the latest in artificial intelligence, they have opened up endless possibilities for watching people, monitoring them, perhaps giving authorities just that little bit of too much control over their people. You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. China is building hundreds of what it calls smart cities, where data on people and their movements brought together to manage everything from traffic congestion to rubbish collection, shopping, suspicious behavior too. At what point does efficiency become something more intrusive?
Advances in artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and big data in so-called smart cities are leading us towards unprecedented levels of surveillance. London used to be known as the most surveilled city in the world. But today, Beijing, with 800,000 surveillance cameras, comes out on top and is reported as China's smartest city.
AI is good for the world, helping people in various ways. And it's just going to get more so in the future. Even help more, net positive.
Is it making our lives better, more efficient, and keeping us safe? Or are we moving towards a dystopian society of social control, losing our basic rights to algorithms? Masses of sensors monitoring our every move could help cities run more efficiently, help traffic with fewer delays, keep us more secure, and help cities become more sustainable.
I can see all the sensors that are placed throughout Ann Arbor. I can see what the sensor data looks like in real time, so as it's streaming in, I can see that. I can see the weather forecast. I can see what the status of each site is, whether or not a valve is open or closed. And I also have the possibility and the option to open and close a valve on my phone as needed. And by also having this on the internet, like, it doesn't have to be me that controls. It could be a colleague of mine, it could be the city.
In 2016, the city of Hangzhou implemented a system that can predict traffic flow 10 minutes ahead of time with 90% accuracy, and responds by changing traffic light patterns to even out congestion. It can even send text messages to people to help them plan different routes. It also allows people committing crimes to be tracked down by police. But in China's Xinjiang region, human rights groups have raised concerns about surveillance.
All the measures which have been taken in the last year or so have contributed to alienating the Uyghur population rather than integrating it to the Xinjiang society and Chinese society.
Residents must install an app on their phones which scans for content considered inappropriate. By 2020, China wants to implement a social credit system which sources citizens' data, tracking what they buy, pay back in loans, and post online. It assesses their integrity based on their daily activity. In the US and in the UK, predictive policing techniques are being implemented. They use big data to forecast high crime probability areas, and lampposts equipped with microphones listen in to conversations. They can recognize trigger words and sounds, and direct cameras to zoom in on the speakers. While smart cities promise to make lives easier and our societies better, is surveillance overreaching its remit, tracking, rating, and analyzing our every move?
Well, we have cameras on in New York. Simon Sylvester Chowdhury is joining us via Skype, the Executive Director of CivLab, which calls itself a global platform for urban innovation. At the round table with us here, former Chief Superintendent of the Met Police, Dao Babu. We have Dr. Enver Tohti Bugda, who's an independent researcher, and the journalist Mary Ann Russon. Dr. Tohti, let me ask you this first of all, because You were expelled from China, the city that we've mentioned here. You're from the Uyghur
Yes.
community. You were a cancer doctor.
I was cancer surgeon.
You found increased cases of cancer in your particular region, and
Yes.
when this was pointed out to the Chinese authorities, they took exception to it. Your family are still in that region. You're having to work here in the UK
Yeah.
as a bus driver. Do they tell you, are they able to tell you how things have changed and whether they feel that they're being watched all the time in China?
Because all the telephone was monitored 24 hours a day, so when we make contact, they're always telling me, look, my son, our life is improved dramatically, and everything is fine, it is great. That is all they can say.
But that's their code.
Yes, exactly, and I understand that very well.
And from what you know, Marianne, let me ask you first of all, how have things changed in China? Because I'm thinking it's not like a 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, a steady progression. These things have gone exponentially, where we're talking about being able to facially recognize people wherever they happen to be, to monitor their lives, social inclusion, good citizen. It's gone crazy.
It has, I would say, over the last, I mean, these things are not things I talked about, but they're things that are worked on. So you work on it and then you market a solution. It's a huge thing. They've probably been working on this in China probably for the most of the last 5 to 10 years, you know, ever since the emergence of artificial intelligence, which is a big part of facial recognition and everything, all of that goes together. It's not one thing. With the surveillance, you need the ability to compute that and just, you know, basically define and understand this. And they're using computers, artificial intelligence, neural networks to do this. There are huge numbers of startups in China which are going to Singapore, which has a very, very friendly incubator sort of environment. If you're willing to say that your company is based in Singapore, they will give you all of the business support, advice and grants that you need. And so some of these Chinese firms are going to Singapore to basically try and expand their technologies, and Singapore is very interested in surveillance as well. One of the companies I met is called Zajera Labs. They've built an incredible, all by themselves, 52-layer neural network that's able to find any individual, any car, and any object from video footage with a 97% accuracy within seconds. So if you give them a picture of your face, and they're trying to find you just, let's say, on the island of Singapore, they can, the police, Singapore police, who are already trialling this, can feed this into the system, and they can find you on any of their CCTV cameras in real time.
It has gone a long way, hasn't it, Dal?
Yeah,
Superintendent?
well, no. I'm just a plain mister, I think.
Okay. Would you say it had become more sinister, more pervasive, in a bad way?
I'm not entirely sure it has. I think there have been some very poor examples. You solve crime. And I'm coming through this from a crime aspect. So I think your guests will be talking about civil liberties, and I think that's a really, really important area. But I think for me, it was really about the assistance of CCTV in terms of crime solving. And there's 3 ways you solve crime. You actually get somebody to confess. You get witnesses who've seen what's happened, or you use some kind of forensics. And some of that is around CCTV. And the CCTV, in London, we have the most CCTV cameras anywhere in the world. And they've actually been incredibly helpful in solving crime. But there is issues about civil liberties here. I know in Alum Rock, which is one of the wards in Birmingham, which is has a large Muslim population.
Your home territory?
Yes, and I know it well, and I've done a lot of work since I've left the police on the so-called Trojan horse schools, where there's a suggestion that Muslim communities were trying to take over schools, which turned out to be totally false. But what they did was the local police, West Midlands Police, spent millions of pounds on CCTV cameras, which were then targeted at mosques. And when the community found out, they're up in arms around this. So I think, you know, as well as helping people, I think we need to make sure that we maintain the civil liberties angle around this.
How much did you see it change in the time that you were in the police force? Because you left, what, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
And what do you think about how far it's come? Good or bad?
It's massive. You're absolutely right. The surveillance under the old system was 2 or 3 men, and it was men who would follow individuals around, and they would rely on sort of their ability to do that in real time. When I left, I was a gold firearms commander, and you'd sit in a room, you'd have a bank of CCTVs, you'd have listening devices out there, you'd have CCTV, you'd have real-time images there, and you'd have surveillance of individuals there. So it was a massive change, and actually it helped to save lives because you were able to follow the individuals, identify people who are going to do bad things, intercept them, stop people, save people's lives. So there's a lot of potential of doing good.
Is there a but that follows?
There is a but, because we know what the PREVENT campaign, the PREVENT is one of the 4 strategies of the government's counter-terrorism strategy. The PREVENT arm of it funded cameras that were then used, instead of crime, they were used for surveillance purposes on mosques in Birmingham. And that, I think the Muslim community remember that. The wider community are very, very nervous about the PREVENT strategy. And in fact, if you put toxic brand into Google, the first thing that comes up is the government's PREVENT strategy.
Okay. Simon, I'm going to come to you in just a second. Dr. Tochty, we'll come back to you for further reaction in a moment. But Simon, sitting there, you are helping people develop technologies that effectively either make things work better or make it possible for authorities or companies to learn more about the people that they are trying to reach. In other words, it's a form of spying, isn't it?
Well, you could say it's a form of spying. I think, there are a lot of different ways you could look at surveillance. There's obviously, the progression we've made with video surveillance. I tend to agree. Innovation's gone a long way. We've, gone from the days of this being used for gambling and casinos to protect the house to protecting cities. So, with this movement of smart cities, traditionally it has been quite technocratic and top down, and I think that also goes back to kind of what type of political structure you have. Obviously, in China, you have a different political structure than you do with elected officials in places like the UK and the US, where really we should have a bottom-up approach and take in mind what the citizen feels and what the citizen thinks. I think it also has to do with cost. So, as that innovation progresses, it makes it a lot more affordable for people to have these resources. I mean, I can go buy an iPhone today and have facial recognition on my phone. So obviously these days it's a lot more economical to apply these to security measures.
Can I just ask you this?
Sure.
Are there things that you, as somebody who's an innovator and who's watched the way that this has developed, are there some things that have made your toes curl, that have made you think, hang on, that is a step too far?
Well, I don't think it's the technology that scares me. It's who has the power of the technology and in whose hands it is. I think there are a lot of benefits that we can learn from, especially from an anti-terrorism perspective. Personally, I walk through Grand Central terminals every day to go to work, and that is a highly concentrated area. Last year I was with Huawei, the Chinese company, looking at some of their technology following the terrorist attacks in Belgium, and quite frankly, it resonated very much with me. However, if we're doing this to do 24/7 surveillance on all citizens, we walk right into the 1984 story, and going back to the point of civil liberties, I don't think that offers anything.
But that is a fair point, Dr. Tochty, isn't it? It's how you use the technology, isn't it? And if it's used for nefarious reasons, which you believe increasingly it is being used for nefarious reasons in places like China, your home area, then that is a danger. But it can also be for good purposes.
Actually, since we are talking about China, we are missing another point, which is hidden civilian system. For example, my family, they were not watched by CCTV, but they were watched by the neighbors. They have implanted a neighborhood watch system. Every single street, they have a committee. Their job is to watch who is coming, who is going. And that is much more effective than CCTV. And China further developed this into DNA testing, DNA coding. Last month, they have reported that they use that DNA sequences. They have captured 29 Uyghur terrorist suspects, which I don't believe they were really terrorist suspects. They might be just relatives of some Uyghur.
But DNA is used all the time to try and catch criminals in this country and other countries in the world. It's that advanced. So, excuse me, catching from you. What is sinister about that?
Well, because there are the things related even more stuff. For example, they use DNA as a cover up to do the tissue matching for the organ harvesting, organ transplantation. That is what is happening in Xinjiang. And little earlier, I have heard that you were talking about social credit system, which I understand that is there's two different opinions in English world and in Chinese world. In English, you are saying about that big data gathering, but in Chinese world, I understood is this system is targeting Chinese counterfeit products. Because China is notorious of these counterfeit products, and this damages the dream, become the superpower. I think this is the main target.
In your investigations into this, have you seen things that you think have taken this to a very worrying stage?
I mean, all of it is quite worrying. Essentially, all of this smart cities technology, which is connecting everything, it is going to end up having a bad consequence. It is basic. It's already too much. If you're talking about whether Big Brother's here, whether Minority Report is here, it's already here. It's already been here for quite some time. It's just that this is all technology that isn't talked about. You know, 3-4 years ago, we already knew that China had the technology to basically use CCTV cameras that already had artificial intelligence that could pick out bombs in the middle of its streets, pick out people doing something suspicious.
Simon's waving. I think he wants to jump in at this point. What do you want to say, Simon?
Oh no, I just wanted to say that, really it kind of takes me to the saying where everything's okay until it isn't, right? And so, I think until something, significant happens to others where some of this technology could have prevented it, we're not okay with it, but then we are. Additionally, there are a lot of positive ways that this technology is being used, and I want to go to a quick healthcare example. Surveillance doesn't have to be all about facial recognition. It can be about more than that. In India, they're using smart city data and they're using information to locate where there are incidents for infant mortality. So a group in India has collected data around where these occurrences are having of infant mortality, and so they're placing ambulances in appropriate places. And in regions, they've decreased infant mortality by 50% by being able to take these women who are pregnant to the appropriate hospitals.
But that's big data, it's not surveillance. That's big data.
How is that not
big data
surveillance?
is fine. Surveillance is a different issue completely. Surveillance is deliberately setting out to look for something and basically spying on actual individuals. It's basically having a CCTV camera network that's always on and always looking. There's nothing wrong with big data. There are huge benefits to big data analytics. That's completely different from surveillance.
Well, in my definition of surveillance isn't only about TVs and cameras. It's about collecting foot data and traffic data.
I just think there's something we need to be very clarified.
Simon, this is Dahl jumping in.
Hello.
Former police superintendent.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that we sort of have some checks and balances for the private sector. And I think what we're seeing is the private sector is motivated by money. It's about stakeholder values. It's about their shareholder value. And what we need is some real measures in place that understands what they're doing. So in this country, in Britain, which has a reputation of being a liberal democracy, even in Britain, we have had private companies that have set up CCTV cameras in order to catch people committing offences. They've actually constructed, if you go to Enfield, London Borough of Enfield, they actually constructed a system where you had to commit a traffic offence to get into a line of traffic. And then they had CCTV there that was just finding people who were doing this. So you had that situation. I've mentioned the issues in Alum Rock in Birmingham. So and we more recently had the Notting Hill Carnival this year, which is a celebration of...
It's one of the biggest carnivals
it's the biggest carnival in Europe,
yeah.
And it has over 2 million people there, started by immigrants from the Caribbean. And there was facial recognition apparently used, and people had concerns about it because it didn't work. So you know, although
But am I right in saying the number of serious incidents affecting the police, involving the police, went down because of the CCTV at the Notting Hill Carnival? Because it used to be very high and now it's gone down a bit.
Well, it's not necessarily CCTV. I mean, CCTV plays a part,
yeah.
but it's about that. It's about engagement with people. It's about making sure that that there's a team there that works with the community, understands what the route's going to be. So all of that, and there's a preemptive arrest of known criminals before the carnival actually starts.
Yeah.
So, but I suppose my main concern is that if we are going to have an extension of CCTV, it's important to have the checks and balances, and we can't trust private enterprise, because private enterprise will be motivated by money. They will go to regimes, with all due respect, like China, that won't have the checks and balances. And if we're having those issues in this country with CCTVs being targeting mosques to see who's going in and out of those, we have CCTV used in a way that doesn't have the confidence of the community, then it doesn't bode well for more difficult regimes around the world.
Dr. Tokhti, do say what you want to say, but then I want to come back to you to talk about some other work you're doing that may be relevant to this, which is organ harvesting. So what is it you wanted to say?
Yeah, and 2 weeks ago I saw a footage from China. That is CCTV footage, and from the pedestrian crossing, and one girl hit by a car and lying down in the middle of the road, and then that CCTV is looking at it, and nobody doing nothing. Nobody is doing nothing to this girl until another car come and run over her again and killed her. So what is the use? And that is the real purpose of Chinese CCTV. They don't really bother by anything else, but only concern is the regime stability.
You are about to go from this studio to the British Houses of Parliament to give evidence to an inquiry into organ harvesting.
That's correct.
In China. You are a respected surgeon. This is one of your key areas of expertise. If surveillance footage could spot the people who were involved in this sort of thing and thereby help to prevent it, something terrible like that, would you see the benefits of it?
I don't think Chinese CCTV is going to prevent such organ harvesting.
Facial recognition?
No, because Chinese organ harvesting, it is state-sponsored. What they're doing is that they try to find potential candidate. If you are against the communist regime, then you are a potential candidate for the organ harvesting. And that is what they do.
So it isn't crime prevention in that case at all?
No,
and you'll be telling this to British politicians?
Yes.
Well, let's hope you can do some good and try and stop that. Where do you think it goes from here, Mary-Anne? And I'll ask the same question of you in a moment, Simon, if I may.
It's going to all sectors of society. So the company that we met in Singapore, the one that's based in Singapore, but it's actually a Chinese company, and that they've got all this, I said to them, you're from China, you realize what the Communist Party could do with your technology. They could use this to enable, you know, a regime beyond what we even know today. What are you doing about this? And they said, oh, no, we don't really want to support regimes, but we think there's lots of good uses for it. I said, OK, like what? They said, oh, well, Chinese schools want it. They want it so they can track all the pupils to see who hasn't attended school. You know, there's not even just in China. In America, there are churches that are now using facial recognition and CCTV to track which congregants haven't been to church, so they can go and tell them off. You know, it's bad, and it is pervasively bad. So this company said to us, oh, we're not going to go out and seek the Chinese government because we know our other clients wouldn't like it. But there are lots of other clients in China who would like it.
OK, Simon, it's the old adage is, from people who support this sort of thing, is if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to be worried about. So why should I care if there's a CCTV camera on me? Why should I care if somebody's picking up my data if I'm leading a squeaky clean, normal, healthy life? But that isn't the argument you've heard here today.
No, well, and I know I tend to agree as well. You know, again, going back to the technology is going to progress. We're not going to stop it from progressing, but it's, you know, in whose hands it is. And going back to the system, you know, from our side, I always tell people if you want things to change, vote. There's, you know, a hyper locality of power and in whose hands that power is in. So I tend to agree about, you know, how this technology can be used. And I think that yeah, from our perspective in the United States, the only way to do something is vote. But I think there's also another story of economics
But
here,
we,
right?
we can't go backwards, though, can we? We've, as some people say, we've let the genie out of the bottle.
We have let the genie out of the bottle in more ways than one. We're also looking at things from a cybersecurity perspective. When things like autonomous vehicles and Internet of Things come online within cities, they're going to be more susceptible to hacking, and that's going to make citizens the risk a lot higher for everybody moving.
Very quickly, we're coming to the end of the programme.
Well, I think it's really worrying if the private enterprise says vote and that's the way you change things. You voted in America, you got Trump. It doesn't really bode well. I think the reality of the situation, private companies are interested in profit. It's really important to have civil society there, having checks and balances. And I'm not a sort of bleeding heart liberal. I believe in making sure that we have a strong security system that protects us. But the evidence is that we have breaches of that. And I think I'm quite worried about the private sector because they are motivated by profit.
Well, look, the fact is that we're talking about it, and hopefully there are people out there watching this and taking it in. It's not us watching you, it's you watching us on this occasion and taking and spreading the word from there. To all of my guests from New York and from here in London, thank you very much indeed from me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team. We hope to have your company next time. Bye for now.